Welcome to MetalCast, the podcast where we're turning up the heat on all things metal, roofing. On this show, we'll explore the world of metal roofing from its durability to design, expert insights, and more. Join us as we bang out the details on the toughest roofs in the game. Get ready to unleash the power of metal roofing. Hello everyone, my name is Megan Ellsworth here at MetalCoffeeShop.com, and you're listening to a MetalCast episode, and I'm here with my friend Mitch, and we're talking about metal roofing, comparing standing seam and stone-coated steel. So I'm really excited, Mitch, to talk about this and kick it off. So can you please introduce yourself to start us off?
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I love jumping on these. My name is Mitch Heitsch. I'm the regional manager for Unified Steel. We're one of the leading manufacturers of stone-coated metal roofing, which we'll be able to hopefully talk about and elaborate on a little bit more of what that is and what that means. But I'm the regional manager for the central and eastern region. So I cover from Florida up through North Dakota. So I have a pretty wide, vast range of states and territories and regions that I cover. So
yeah, wow, that Florida all the way to North Dakota, that's huge. And really big weather differences, obviously. So you're trying to kind of help each customer do different things, I bet.
It's a lot of fun. I am a Floridian, so I live just north of Orlando here, and I've been in the roofing industry now for about 10 years, and I recently have taken on the central region within the last couple of years. So it's been a lot of fun to see the difference. You know, in Florida, we tend to get kind of tunnel visioned into wind uplift and wind driven rain and those kind of topics. But getting further north, now you're starting to talk snow loads and hail impact. And so it's been a lot of fun over the last couple of years to be able to expand my reach and knowledge on just what different regions require for performance and aesthetics and all that kind of stuff that factor into it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, honestly. Sometimes I love to just geek out about that, about roofing and the differences between regions. So, okay, we all know there's a huge rising interest in metal roofing, which I love. What do you think is driving that interest?
I think it's purely performance based when you start talking about the interest of metal roofing, right? It has turned and shifted. There has been a steady growth of metal over the last 25 years. I think the MRA has posted out there that, you know, it's gone from a 3% overall market share to 18% overall market share. So it's a pretty significant amount of growth. I would say even within that, it's been over the last probably 4 or 5 years that I have seen personally a very massive increase in awareness on metal roofing and the interest in that. What drives that? Again, like I said, performance. I think that people are looking for higher performing roofs. I think insurance is driving a lot of that conversation. So you're seeing insurance companies that are demanding higher performing roofs. And so people are demanding more out of their roofs, where in the past, I'm in the roofing industry. I geek out over it. I cannot drive down the road without staring at roofs and pointing out what different types of roofs there are.
Yeah.
But your average homeowner, your average consumer, they don't think about it. And it's not a new kitchen remodel. It's not something that they walk into every day and go, wow. But as performance has shifted, it is one of the most important parts of your home or building structure. I don't just want to pigeonhole this to residential, that it's one of the most important things because it's your initial waterproofing barrier, right? So I think people are starting to realize that, and it's getting a lot more awareness.
Yeah, totally. And I even had a friend who has nothing to do with roofing. She is a homeowner and was asking me about metal shingles because she wanted the shingle look, but wanted metal because she had heard me talking about how great it was. And so I think that's fascinating. So I connected her with a local contractor here, and now she's getting metal shingles on her roof. So
well,
that's
hopefully they're
amazing.
Unified Steel. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, you know what? I don't know, but I should ask and make sure that they are.
There's my one and only sales plug I'll do.
Yes, yes. So what would you say are the two leading metal systems?
That's a loaded question, I think, right? If I was going to break it into two different categories, I would really say you have your metal panels, and then you would have your stamped metal shingles tile shake look. If I were to run an exercise and tell you, I wanted you to close your eyes for a second and just think of a metal roof, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's typically the metal panels, right? But there's so many more categories that are out there. You know, you got your metal panels that typically people associate with that either barn style look or a Key West, Florida style look, that coastal look. But then you have this emerging category of the metal shingles and tiles, which are pre-formed. They're meant to look like other roofing products, or they're meant to look like something else. You know, you can dive that in a little deeper if you wanted to and say, I could really boil it down into 4 or 5 different categories. You know, you have in the panel categories, you have your standing seam. That would be your hidden fasteners, your long runs. You have corrugated metal. That's typically what people would see on a barn style. Your ribbed or R panels, right? Those are going to be your exposed fasteners that would be out there in the panel aspect. And then you dive into your metal shingle looks. And even within that, you have painted stamped metal, but then you have, in our case, the category of a stone coated panel that takes it an extra step. That's not just a metal panel, that it's, you know, coated with granulars. It's meant to look like other roofing products. So it really is a loaded question to say there's 2 different styles, but then there's so many different subcategories within that, and every one of them has different performance factors and aesthetic factors to that.
Yeah, and the stone coated steel just looks so good. So I really need to make sure she's getting that on her roof. But it truly does, and you're so right with the shingle, shake, tile. There's so many different types of metal roofing imitating those kind of, more old school tile.
And that's been our hook for decades, right? This product has not, it's not new or innovative. It has been around forever. But what we have always said is our hook was always roofing's best kept secret. And it's a great tagline. I love it, right? But I also hate it because I don't want it to be a secret. I want everyone to know what stone coated metal is, because you've driven by a stone coated metal roof at some point in your life, and you probably haven't even noticed it. It is look like shingles, or it's look like tile, or it's look like shake. And so to say it's a secret, I want to be able to really categorize this, that stone coated metal is a different metal product category, and it's a very high performing, it's a great product that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so how do the stone coated systems and standing seam systems compare with installation and maintenance?
Again, kind of a loaded question.
Yeah.
But what I would really say the main difference is, installation. Let's cover that one first. Installation of and I'm going to say standing seam, but now I'm going to get even more into the weeds. That standing seam can mean, is it a mechanically fastened seam? Is it a clip system? Right. So how does that get installed, and what goes with that? If you're doing a mechanical fasten, you might need a machine that helps crimp the seam as it goes up there. Really high performing product, right? I know I sell stone coated metal, but I am not here to talk negatively about it, because I think it is a very high performing product. But what you get with that is long runs, right? So you're talking, if you've got a 40-foot section from eave to ridge, that you've got a 40-foot panel that you might have to get on site. So there's logistics with that. There's the installation of it. Anytime you start talking long runs with that, you do run into issues with oil canning or certain issues there. You also have that expansion contraction factor that you have to play for. So there's the long runs. There's that aspect of it. Your metal panels, your metal shingles or those kind of systems typically get installed in a much smaller scale. So for instance, our panels are about a 1 foot by 4 foot panel, and they get laid out very similar to, say, like a shingle roof, that they would lay out, they get installed that way. And so it's a much smaller install, that you don't have to go out and be exact with your measurements to make sure that you're getting that 40-foot run dialed into within half an inch. You can actually install it and fabricate it as you're installing on site. So the installation is a little bit different from that aspect. From a performance standpoint, again, metal roofing is on the rise because of performance. And standing seam performs very well in high wind categories, in snow load areas, that kind of thing. So it's a really high performing product. Stone coated metal is also a very high performing product in all of those categories as well. I would say from the maintenance aspect, what standing seam and painted metals carry as a benefit is that they're slick. They're metal, right? So snow can slide off of them. They are typically a little bit better with the mold and algae resistance on that aspect, because a granulated surface will hold those mold spores. Now, that being said, it's metal, so it's not like it's penetrating into it. So it does wash off very easily. So from that aspect, it's great. What I will say is I mentioned the oil canning aspect on a painted metal. With the stone coated, you don't typically get that. So if you were to run into a situation where you have impact onto a metal roof, there is a risk that you run that you could look up and see small indentations in the roof if the sunlight hits it the right way. The beauty of the stone coated system is those granulars help hide a lot of those little dings and dents and micro dents. So impact resistant wise, I think stone coated kind of wins that battle in comparing the two. But performance wise, I think they're both very great performing products. I get asked this a lot, and I would say that cost wise, you typically see about the same cost from a metal panel aspect or a stone coated. A lot of factors carry into that. It could be how familiar is a crew with installing it, right? Because labor is going to drive a massive conversation with that. How cut up is the roof? What do the details look like? The transitions look like? Things like that. So all of those do factor in, but typically across the board, we see that pricing is going to be about the same. So it's what are you looking for aesthetically? What are you looking for performance wise? And then that kind of helps drive and make that conversation and that decision a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I love this. It's so fascinating. And when you were talking about the granules with impact, that is so what a great selling point and what a great conversation starter for a homeowner, for a building owner, saying comparing the two. If they come to you or come to the contractor with all these questions and wanting metal, and then they can talk them down that road and help them decide. But yeah, that's brilliant.
Very much so. And it's, I'm going to do another shameless plug here because on the stone coated aspect, we talk about impact resistance a lot. Unified Steel has recently gone through a pretty rigorous test called the VSH rating, which stands for very severe hail.
Oh wow.
It's a big testing standard in the commercial application, but we went through that testing process with our Unified Steel line, with our stone coated line, and have actually achieved VSH ratings for this product. We're able to do that based on the stone coating as well as the airspace that exists underneath the product. So what that test essentially does is it basically doubles the impact force of a class 4 hail rating. And they're measuring to see if it's going to damage the substrate below. So is it impacting the underlayment? Is it impacting the sheathing? Is it actually absorbing that impact? And proud to say that Unified Steel carries that VSH rating and is one of the few steep sloped roofing products that actually carries that rating. So from an impact resistance, it is higher performing than any other roofing product out on the market today.
Wow. That's huge. Oh my gosh. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so what are the differences in cost and long-term value across some of these metal systems?
Yeah, again, the cost wise, if I was comparing a true standing seam roof to our product, that's usually the cost that you see stone coated and standing seam come into play. I mentioned before, right? You have panels, you have shingle looks, but then you have these subcategories. What we're seeing as the demand grows with metal roofing, there's always going to be that need to come up with a more economical solution, right? Because standing seam and stone coated metal, I'm not going to lie, they're not a cheap system, right? They perform very well. They're long-term roofing systems that typically last 40 to 50 years on the roof. So we can market that it is really a lifetime roof because in 50 years, I'm probably not going to be around. But with that, you do see kind of subcategories that typically fall under a lower price range. I mentioned the corrugated, the rib panels, the R panels. Those are typically the cheaper metal roofing option that you can buy at your typical lumber yard or anything that it's a barn style, right? You're going to have corrugated panels that have exposed fasteners in them. The metal itself typically lasts a very long time. The problem you run into with those is that you actually have issues with the fasteners themselves. You have issues with the rubber and neoprene washers that are on there that you have to replace every 10 years or so. So there's a trade-off that if you're going to go a little bit more cost effective on the upfront side, you're probably going to have to maintain it. And the overall life cycle is probably going to end up costing you more over that 40 to 50 year span than if you had gone with a stone coated metal roof to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a good point. I think also there's something to be said about that like 50-year lifetime, both commercial and residential, when as a selling point to your customers. If a contractor's listening to this, selling point to your customers, that's massive. And something, especially, people don't want to replace their roof more than once or twice, right?
We recently have revamped what we call our life cycle cost analysis tool. It's just a calculator, and what it does is kind of outline over the span of one unified steel roof, what does your other roofing products typically, carry in terms of overall cost? Because I can say that, we're gonna be around forever, but there are people that don't necessarily want to have that upfront investment, right? So that's totally fine, and I get it. But what I want everyone to understand is, what does that mean over a long-term period? And when you're talking to a building owner in the commercial space, or you're talking to an individual homeowner, that could be a very important conversation that they don't even realize. I'm not going to try and pick on shingles. This is a metal podcast, so I might a little bit. But let's just, if I was using round numbers, a $20,000 shingle roof versus a $50,000 metal roof. If I'm using round numbers, that is a pretty significant cost difference. But if you really think about where the economy is going, where inflation is going, where all that's happening, on average, you're going to have to replace that shingle roof nationwide about every 18 years or so. So in 18 years, if I was using a standard 2.5% inflation rate, that $20,000 roof in 18 years, the next time you're going to have to replace it, is going to be closer to 40,000. So now I have increased the amount of what that roof has cost me, even within the first 18 years. So looking at that over the overall life cycle is a very important thing to do to understand. Now, that may not be for everybody, right? We're in a generation where people like to move every 8 to 10 years. If we can. Now, the housing market has done what it's done. Inflation has done what it's done. People are kind of hunkering down a little bit more. But, whatever the mindset is of what you're looking for that roof, of resale value or a long-term investment, is going to drive the factor into what kind of roof do they want to select.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I live in Colorado, and wildfires are a huge, deal here. And if you want to live in the mountains, 9 times out of 10, those roofs are metal. And insurance is requiring those houses to have metal roofs just because of the fire resistance, right? And embers, landing on a metal roof, not as big of a deal as embers landing on a shingle roof. And so I think that's something to be said as well, with the shingle, achieving the shingle look with the granules of stone coated steel, but having the safety of metal. And especially now, insurance is just requiring it in a lot of places.
We're seeing that a lot, again, and I know I said at the beginning I was going to give my one sales pitch, but I'm going to give another shameless plug.
It's okay. I like it.
It is very important to know that the roofing product itself, right, is part of a fire resistant system. So Class A fire ratings are the conversation you're talking about, with insurance requiring a Class A. Unified Steel carries that Class A rating, but it has to be used in conjunction with a full system. One of the benefits that I'm thankful I work for a company like Westlake. Westlake is the owner of Unified Steel. We have our whole entire components division, Westlake Royal Roofing Components. Within those components, we have battens, we have underlayments, we have, flashing. We have so many different components that go with our roof system. So when we start talking Class A, you need to use a Class A rated underlayment. Your standard underlayments don't all carry a Class A. You need to use Class A rated, different parts and pieces. And so what we're able to offer is that whole buildup to say, here's your Class A system. And yes, the product itself can qualify it, but it has to be used in conjunction with all these things. So you want to make sure that you're including all of those things for wildfire. Fortified is another big conversation that's coming up across the whole country. That's another big thing, right? Our product is a fortified approved product when used with the full system.
That takes us right into the next question. So how do stone coated steel and standing seam metal products, how do they compare when it comes to weather performance? And what are people kind of choosing?
Yeah, again, I'm a Floridian, so I can talk regionally to wind uplift and wind driven rain. I cover out into Minnesota and Wisconsin and Colorado, where you're starting to talk about snow load and hail and all that kind of stuff. Then you start talking about Western states where wildfires are a big deal. Certain aspects with that. What I will tell you is that, with the stone coated metal, you check every single one of those boxes. In a wind uplift category, we have testing standards that get us up over 200 miles an hour. In a hail category, I mentioned before, we carry the VSH rating, right? That very severe hail rating. When you start talking fire prone areas, we are a Class A rated system product. So, every single one of those weather categories, we punch on in the stone coated metal aspect with unified steel. When you start to talk about standing seam, I think you hit a lot of those same categories as well from a performance aspect. Wind uplift, obviously, it's a nice low profile metal roof. You're not going to get a lot of issues with wind uplift with the right system, right? I have seen some of those cheaper metals that tend to kind of peel open like a tuna can. But you do get those high wind uplift values. You do get impact resistance, right? But what I mentioned before is there's a difference, I think, with impact resistance performance and impact resistance aesthetics, because you can run the risk of that oil canning or that golf ball denting. And when you start talking about insurance, a lot of insurance carriers carry an aesthetic clause where they're not going to replace that roof if you get a hailstorm and all you have is little micro dents all over the roof. Still performing well, it's still doing what it needs to do, but it may not look the same as when you first installed it, right? And then there is the fire ratings. There are metal roof systems that carry that same aspect as well. I mentioned before with unified steel with stone coat, you get that airspace underneath there. So you do get what we call a cool roof system where air is constantly flowing above the roof deck. What the struggle is you face with typical standing seam roofs or other metal panels is that they are laying flat to the deck, right? So there's not an airspace, there's not that continuous airflow, and so you do have that heat transferring directly onto the sheathing or the underlayment.
Yeah, exactly. So, can you tell me a little bit about the growing trend of on-site panel forming?
Oh, I love that question. Hugely growing trend. I think if you attend any of the local trade shows at IRE, at FRSA, at any of these ones, you have seen a massive influx of people that have brought in toe behind roll formers or certain things like that, right? It is a hugely growing trend, and in my mind, a concerning trend for a couple reasons. I think that it has helped the roofing contractor bring their costs down to get a more affordable solution to the homeowner, but it has opened the door for a pretty massive amount. I mean, Florida, we have very, very, very strict codes, right? There's Florida product approvals, there's Miami-Dade approvals, there's all those different things. I'm having a hard time. The personal side of it, what I'm seeing is that a lot of those codes are applying to the metal itself, right? So if you get one of these roll or toe behind roll formers that you can pull right up to the site, you can form everything on site. That's great. Your product categories might fall into what metal coils are you buying, but they're not necessarily translating into the product itself. So how do we know how that machine is set up to roll form that it's going to perform in high wind uplift? How do we know those type of things? And then how do we know what the metal is that's being put on the roof, right? Like I'm not trying, I think that's more of a handful of bad actors that might be causing this concern, but I am seeing this where you're not getting the same product that if you would buy it from an actual manufacturer of the product. Because there's always going to be those that are trying to save the money. They're trying to maybe cut some corners on this or that. And then there's the other side of it where, I mentioned before, I love working for the company that I do with Westlake because we have a very long history. We go back to the old Girard panels that were installed back in the 1960s. We have warranties that stand behind it, and we have a proven track record that we've been around. When you start talking about some of these toe behind on-site roll forming, that kind of thing, your warranty is kind of only as good as that contractor's in business. And I think we've seen across the board, sometimes those contractors can be in business today and out tomorrow. So it's, what is your warranty? What is your actual performance? And, I can tell you one thing, but the actual results are going to say another thing. So I think it's a massively growing trend. As it's growing so fast, it needs to have a little bit more monitoring to it because it's causing some areas of concern in my mind that need to be kind of addressed when you start talking about performance aspects of that.
Yeah, I mean, just the warranty aspect that you mentioned alone is something of concern, especially for a homeowner, a building owner. That, I mean, you want that 20-year warranty from Westlake or from whoever,
50-year
right?
warranty. I'm
Oh,
gonna correct you. It's a 50-year
oh,
warranty from Unified Steel. So
oh,
yes,
my apologies. You want that 50-year warranty, right?
absolutely.
So you're so right. That is a huge concern. Interesting. Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it is, and it's unfortunately, I see the advertisements, I see the marketing of lifetime warranties, lifetime roofs, and it's like, well, who's actually backing up that warranty? And that's something that with everything, when a hurricane hits, when something like that happens, we're out teaching our end users, whether it be a building owner or a homeowner, that do your research on your contractors, please. Like, make sure that they have a license, make sure that they're, using the right products. And we always preach about vetting the contractor base. I don't know if we spend enough time really talking about vetting the manufacturing aspect of that. And I really want to make that point to say that, as with everything, do the research, right? Dive into it. How long have they been in business? What are their warranties? What is the black and white? And then what is the fine print? I mean, there is a lot that goes into it. So vet it, do the research, and make an educated decision. And if you have any questions, there are so many resources out there between the MRA or the individual manufacturing reps that are happy to help walk you through that process.
Totally. Yeah, and I love that you've mentioned MRA several times. Renee is so fabulous and everything that the MRA offers to contractors and homeowners, building owners, mostly homeowners, but go check it out. Really great information.
Great education source.
Yeah. Yep. So, Mitch, oh my gosh, we've come to the end. This has been amazing. Thank you for chatting with me. So, to kind of round us out, what trends or innovations do you think going into this new year are going to shape metal roofing's future?
Trend is probably the easiest part of that conversation. Trend is insurance. I hate to say it that way, and I don't want to say that insurance is not the bad guy, right? I think that everyone's trying to figure this out because there in the last few years there has been so many different changes on things. So, what are the trends moving forward? I think you're going to start seeing, as I mentioned before, some of the growing concerns that I saw around metal roofing. I think you're going to see a little bit more, hopefully, kind of policing of that's going on. There are more and more people entering the space every single day, right? So you're starting to see different profiles. You're starting to see different manufacturers. You're starting to see different products coming out there, and it's fun. It's exciting. There's different ways. So you're going to see kind of a shift, I think, in the architectural trends that might happen. But it's really just going to be kind of figuring out where we're at with insurance and performance. I mean, this last year between fires and hailstorms and everything, I can thankfully say this is the first time in 10 years we haven't had a hurricane hit landfall in Florida. So, we get a break. But that's always a growing concern as a Floridian, right? Is that what is the hurricane season going to be like? And so, I think with that little bit of a breath and a break that, down in the South, you're going to see a lot more people starting to move towards prepping themselves for a hurricane versus the reactionary to it. And I just need a roof now. I think people are able to make a little bit more sound decisions versus just having to rush to get something. So yeah, I think you're going to see kind of a little bit more honing in and solidifying on the manufacturing side from that aspect.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. Well, Mitch, thank you so much for chatting with me today and providing such amazing wisdom and insight into metal roofing and stone coated steel and a standing seam. So this has been amazing. Thank
I know
you.
we just had 30 minutes, but if you want to talk for another 2 or 3 hours, I could probably keep going on this for a while.
Me
So
too. I love talking about metal.
I appreciate the time and always enjoy coming on here and being able to give my opinions, give my thoughts on this because it's such an industry that I'm passionate about and it's just growing. It's growing, it's growing, it's growing.
It is. It has been growing. It will continue to grow. It's amazing. I want a metal roof so badly, but I don't own my house. So maybe in a few years.
We'll talk to the building owner that does own it. Let's, it's an investment. You got to invest in your properties, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you again, Mitch, and happy holidays, happy new year. Everyone out there listening, please go to the Unified Steel directory on MetalCoffeeShop.com, as well as the Westlake Building Products directory on MetalCoffeeShop.com. Go check it out, go to their websites, peruse, and Mitch, thank you again, everyone out there. I'll be seeing you next year on a next MetalCast.
We're already telling those jokes, huh? The see you next year.
Yeah,
Awesome.
see you next
Looking
year.
forward to it. Have a great holidays and looking forward to 2026.
Absolutely, me too. Thank you, Mitch, and everyone out there. See ya.